Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring this meeting to order. We have a very healthy agenda, and I want to make sure we have ample time for healthy discussion taking place today. One of the things that we've all been waiting to hear about is the EM&B report. DDOE did receive it last week, and my staff has had a chance to go over it. We haven't actually had a chance to sit down with EM&B, Tech to discuss it, as we do have questions. But you know, the report has some things, some good facts and some recommendations. But that's why we have an EM&B, to let us know where the good things are and where we can do better. So I look forward to that report as well. So why don't we just go do the introductions. Lance, can you kick it off?
Sure. Lance Lump, DDOE.
Teresa Lawrence, DDOE. Bernice McIntyre, Washington Gas.
Joe Andronico, Access Green.
John Mizrock, representing Councilwoman Shea.
Larry Martin, Sierra Club.
Betty Ann Kane, Public Service Commission.
Keith Anderson, DDOE.
Véronique Marier, DDOE.
Sandra Madison-Fry, People's Council.
Dan Wedderburn, the Council Chair's Rep.
Donna Cooper, Petra. Carrie Lutz, Tetra Tech.
Carol Sabo, Tetra Tech.
Hussein Karim, DDOE. Muhammad Ali, CFO, DDOE.
Daniel White, DDOE.
Pamela Nelson, OPC.
Good morning, Kirk Jones, Office of the Council.
Anna Green, DCSU.
Michael G, DCSU. Marcus Walker, DCSU.
Melissa Adams, Washington Gas.
Colin Shea, Washington Gas. George Nichols, DCSEU.
Sam Sprague, DCSEU.
Jen Jordan, DCPSC.
Nicole Cedar-Roman, OPC.
Steve Slicer, DC Sun. Neil King, DDOE.
Nicole Ritz, Coastal Missouri Ranching.
Meg Hoda, CFO.
Chris Van Arsdale, DCSEU.
Olean Kolwale, DDOE.
Kareem Marshall, DDOE.
Joe Stump.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Big.
I'd like to give the board a few minutes to review the agenda so that
Nobody indicated they were going to call in.
I move.
Second. Second.
all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any that are opposed? Any abstain? Agenda has been adopted or approved. I'd like to move to give the board about 5 minutes to review the minutes from the January 14th meeting. Is there a motion on the floor to adopt the minutes from January 14th?
I would move, but just one correction, the spelling of my name. It's I-N-T-Y.
Which page is that?
First page, the members present, Bernice McIntyre. It's T-Y-R-E.
And I'll give my corrections to Lenora, just a couple of typos.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a typo too as well.
Move to adopt with a minor correction.
Typographicals.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any that oppose? Are there any that abstain? The minutes have been adopted. Larry, we'll move on to inspection and finance.
Okay.
Supplementary report?
All right, so as you all know, the Structure and Finance Committee has been meeting like from the beginning. And we have taken up more or less the same issues over about 5 different meetings. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about our discussion, just in the interest of time. But in the recent minutes from our last meeting, we did make several motions. And you've had an opportunity to review the background on those motions and the motions themselves. So what I propose to do is just to read the motion. And if there are questions, we can get into a discussion of, what led up to that motion and the reasoning behind it. But absent questions, I think we could probably just dispatch with the motions, set them up and knock them down, as it were. Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
Sure.
So I'm looking at the February 13. Hey, Jermaine, we're just about to walk through the motions that came out of the subcommittee, the Structure and Finance Subcommittee. And if we have any questions about the motions, then we'll drill down into it. Otherwise, we're just going to go right through it. All right, so I'm looking at the February 13 meeting summary from the Structure and Finance Committee. And the first motion is concerning the way that we will do meeting summaries. And the motion reads, meeting summaries will describe the basic discussion by members, highlight significant statements by members that appear important for framing the discussion, capture all recommendations, and identify in bold headings motions and resolutions, both those passed by a vote of the advisory board and those made but not passed, and actions, being those statements of things that need to be done and the time in which they should be completed. Meetings should continue to be recorded. An improved recorder should be obtained by DDOE to ensure good recording quality. A link to the recording of the most recent meeting should be posted on the DDOE webpage at the same location as the minutes from past SEU Advisory Board meetings until the following meeting's recording replaces it. So that is to say, only the recordings from the most recent meeting need to be posted. Past recordings must be retained by DDOE as archives of the SEU Advisory Board. So that's a motion. Is there any discussion? Actually, I guess that's 2 minutes.
Is there any discussion on this topic?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Second.
Wait,
Oh, I can't second my motion.
good try, Larry. I think there was some discussion that, Lance, did you have?
Briefly, we spoke to our web person here in-house, and it was an issue posting the recordings on the website. So that is something we still need to figure out how we can work around that. Given the size of posting a live recording on the website. DDOE has an issue of space on the server. So we need to make sure that it can accommodate those recordings. So we still need to work with our IT people to get that done.
Can you purchase more capacity? Is this an issue, technical? If it becomes a problem, can you get more capacity so that you could, in fact,
Well, we're looking into
incorporate
that,
it,
and typically in
modifying
this
it?
agency, every time you request space on the server, you need to have the funds to, help the IT people support that. So we're working around that.
So my question here is, this is a technical implementation
Yeah.
issue, and we've got quite a bit to get through. So move beyond, the sort of motion, do it, and figure out how to do it after that.
Right. I mean, it was,
We're just taking.
Okay, I was going to say, we at the commission live stream all our hearings and meetings and record them and post them, and in video too. So if, we offer some technical help from our folks if you need it to get that done.
and the other thing is, I thought we talked about you don't have to keep them up there forever. So you could like substitute.
Just one,
So
that's what it
just
says.
one, all your, just the last meeting, keep it up until the next meeting.
Right, and that's actually what we gave to our IT folks, but they said they had to go back to Octo, and it was too big, that one file was too big, so.
Okay.
That's what has to be done.
Steve, do you have a comment?
It doesn't have to reside on the DDOE website. You can have a link to any other audio server, and you don't need the website hosting yourselves.
Yeah, I was just because vote
This
on
is
the resolution.
yeah, let's vote on
and
the
let
resolution.
you know.
This is a waste of
All
time.
right, second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose, are there any that abstain? For the record, I'd like to abstain.
And when will you get back to us to tell us, what the result was and whether or not it can be done?
We're still talking to our Octo, so that's something that we've been doing since we last discussed this. So we'll get back to you hopefully by the next board meeting with our updates, or maybe before then.
But of course, if there's any request for, by any board member, we can certainly provide that as we have done in the past. So if anyone does need the audio, we can certainly supply that as we work out this other issue.
It's
Thank
for the public, though, that the
As well,
audience is there. Because the reason that we put this out was because the minutes only summarize what happens. If the public is interested in what actually happened, they can hear it.
All right, Larry.
Okay. The next motion is concerning the establishment of a co-chair or an executive committee. And the Structure and Finance Committee recommends this motion. The SEU Advisory Board create the position of vice chair to aid the chair in the development of meeting agendas and carry out the functions of the chair when the chair is absent, including the convening of meetings. The bylaws will be revised to reflect this and to eliminate the position of convener, which would be made unnecessary by creation of a vice chair. The SEU Advisory Board should charge the Structure and Finance Committee to meet in between meetings of the SEU Advisory Board to review SEU budget and expenses and other appropriate and other information and reports as necessary, and to recommend resolutions to the advisory board as appropriate.
If I can keep, Larry, as I mentioned to you, we're not sure if the position of vice chair is consistent with the act, so I would recommend the bylaws committee look into this further, since Keith is the chair according to the act.
But not the vice chair. But I thought the recommendation was that it would be taken up with the subcommittee, and an amendment to the bylaws if necessary would be done.
So you're proposing that it should go to the bylaws?
Right.
So I take that as a friendly amendment.
Well, comment on it. Keith, do you have an opinion one way or the other, or?
I would concur with what you're saying on this.
Okay, good.
But wait, I have a question. This is more sort of a governance issue. Amending the bylaws is something we can do, correct? The advisory board? If the advisory board's in favor of that, it shouldn't be an issue. That's something we would sort of agree to. So I guess the question is, do you agree to the fact that the bylaws need to be changed? Do you believe in the position of a vice chair to support the board and the Structure and Finance Committee to meet in between to set agendas and make sure that everything's moving along? That's sort of that's the motion.
But I think what Hussein said, there's a question of if it is in concert with the law.
Right.
With the act, okay.
So with the
With the
act.
act.
So
Because I
so we
talked
need
to the
check
folks
the fit-
over in council, they didn't seem to have an issue with it, but
What
The
did
act
you
is
talk to?
silent on the
Yeah,
vice chair.
that's
There's nothing in the act that either speaks or anything else. The governance of the board,
Do you have any position on that?
typical ops.
Have you had a conversation about that?
About vice chair?
Yes.
I don't really know what the act says. I have to go back and look at it. I'm sorry.
The act really says that the mayor appoints the chair.
It is
That's all it
silent
says.
on the
Yeah, so it is
That's all it
the
says.
chair.
Yeah, I
The
spoke with
mayor
Matt.
appoints the chair.
Question, for clarification, what are the next steps regarding this?
I would suggest a meeting of the bylaws subcommittee, and to see if this is consistent with the act, it can be done under the act.
the bylaws subcommittee that I was involved in, I think the chair of it, wasn't I?
All right.
But we'll be glad to consider it, but I do not believe that the act prohibits the establishment of a vice chair. It's silent. So if you want to refer it to the
Yeah.
bylaws
I'd like to
committee,
refer
we
it to
can-
the bylaws
we
committee.
can meet.
Good.
And I believe the other members, just so I can resurrect, I think
Yes.
Sandra, Donna, who else was on the bylaws committee last time? Anybody who would like to join can, but I'll try to call a meeting quickly and we'll deal with that.
It might be useful to just to get a sense today of, without a formal vote,
What?
Get a sense of,
how people felt about, in other words, if it's legally permissible or, if-
Right. Well, I thought that's
If
what
it
we
is.
were voting on was the resolution.
Yeah.
right.
That we would approve creating that position, and we'd send it to the bylaws committee to make the changes that would need to be revised.
Yes.
And if the bylaws committee comes up against some legal reason it can't be done, they'd report back. But I took the motion to be that we would approve
Okay.
the creation of the position and sending it to the bylaws committee to do whatever needs to be done to the bylaws, and then that.
That's right.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad that's been clarified. My question is, so, as soon as that happens, there's no reason it need to take 3 months before a meeting, then we can go ahead and do this. Is that?
No, because it has to be consistent with the act.
No, I understand that. That's not, as soon as the bylaws committee says it's okay, assuming they will,
who makes the final decision if it's
It would
consistent
be-
with the act or not?
OAG, I would have to consult with OAG legal counsel division.
So what
I've
could
already
happen?
talked to them, and it's not clear.
So ideally, what wouldn't happen is that the bylaw committee would determine that it is legally sufficient or that it is not inconsistent with the act. We could then also draft a proposed amendment to the bylaws.
Right.
And that package could be submitted to OAG or whomever it is that makes the final call. And that could be done before the next meeting.
definitely.
And once we get approval, then it could be implemented.
Well, the bylaws revision would have to, I don't know what the bylaws say about how you revise the bylaws,
Right.
but
Well,
so
whatever
I
the
assume
process
it takes
is.
some kind of vote in the board.
Right, the board,
Change
I
the
think
bylaws.
the board would have to vote on
Yeah,
that.
the actual language.
That would have to happen at the next board meeting.
So then that would be the goal and the time frame. And of course, it could be submitted, well, it would have to be, the OAG would have to do it before it's submitted to the board, obviously.
So can we move forward now, taking a vote, just have the whole thing done on the next board meeting?
Well, I think we should
No.
vote.
Yeah,
we should vote on the
And we
resolution.
vote on the resolution and we'll,
Then the next one, we vote on the language.
right.
So I did amend this, and I'll read it again, but there's another question too, so long as we're kind of setting this one up. There's no decision here about how the co-chair or vice chair would be identified. You know, whether it be appointed by the chair, or whether it be a vote by the board. I assume this is something the bylaws committee could also make a recommendation on?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so the revised motion is the SEU Advisory Board create the position of vice chair to aid the chair in the development of meeting agendas and carry out the functions of the chair when the chair is absent, including the convening of meetings. The bylaws committee will meet to consider the motion, and absent legal concerns will approve the motion and advise on revision to the bylaws, including appointment or election of the chair, of vice chair. Okay, and then everything else would stand as far as the advisory board charges the structure and finance committee to meet in between meetings of the SU advisory board, review the SU budget and expenses and other information reports as necessary, et cetera, et cetera.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
I second.
All those in favor, please say yea.
Yeah.
Are there any that oppose? Are there any that abstain? For the record, I'd like to abstain again.
Okay. And I'll provide this language to the Laura. Okay, so the next motion is concerning how we address the SU's annual budgeting and performance measures. And the motion is kind of lengthy. So I'll just, we have sort of four elements of it here, and maybe we can just get a sense of the group one by one if there's any discussion. Okay. So the SEU Advisory Board Structure and Finance Committee identified structural and financial obstacles to optimization of the DCSU programs. The committee met several times in 2012 to investigate the problems and potential solutions. The obstacles discussed are artifacts of both the Clean and Affordable Energy Act, the statutory authority for the SEU, and the RFP developed by the SEU Advisory Board and translated into terms of the current contract. They are, first, the requirement the SU spend down the entire annual funding each year to zero. Okay, so that's a concern. Is everyone in agreement that we've identified this as a concern?
Yes.
All right. Secondly, performance requirements that evaluate the SEU on spending efficiency and social benefit as measured by performance outcomes on a strict annual basis. That is to say that the SEU has to meet its performance requirements every single year. And so it's evaluated, its performance is evaluated on an annual basis based on that year's spending alone. In other words, it has a difficult time seeding programs that won't bear fruit for 2 or 3 years, because if they spend money in any given year, they're evaluated on the money they spend that year against their performance requirements. So every dollar they spend every year has to meet the performance evaluation for that year. They can't have a long-term program that builds by investing in year one that won't pay off in year 3, because it counts against their performance for that year. They don't get a bang for the buck that they spent that year.
Because I think we determined that many of the higher value projects were longer term projects.
That's right.
So it would be multiple years, not.
So we identified this as a concern. Is everyone in agreement that this is a concern?
Yes.
Yeah, I would,
Rephrase it.
well, I mean, no, I think I would, my thought here is I think the performance measures, you know, some of them are really good, but some of them may lead to behavior that isn't desired. So will that look into, will this look at all the performance or just the year to year or just this particular point?
I think that's the second one.
I think it will address your point.
Okay, all
Before
right.
all is said and done. So
All
the
right.
third point, statutory requirement that the SETF be only spent on SEU program operations, which unfortunately precludes by definition such useful program strategies as establishment of a loan loss reserve fund, a revolving loan fund, or other such longer-term institutional funding related incentives.
Yes,
Agreed that we had identified that as a problem?
yes.
And then third, absence of a structural home for the SEU that would serve to anchor contractual agreements with financial institutions, the PJM, local contractors, and clients. The point being that right now, all these folks are just subcontractors to the contractor. And should the contractor not be renewed in any given year, everything is gone. It's all gone. We're left with nothing but a name. So that was the concern raised.
Okay.
Are we in agreement that that was an issue worth discussing further?
Yes.
Okay. So an additional problem was identified in the 2012 SEU Advisory Board report that should also be included in the obstacles being addressed in this proposal. The reason why this is worded this way is because we hadn't really talked about it for the last couple years as we had these other issues. This is kind of a new thing that we identified in the report. The absence of prioritization of the SEU's goals and performance measures by which it organizes its programs. The goals and measures are not all perfectly consistent and reinforcing, and in fact may to a greater or lesser degree compete. This should be formally recognized, and the goals for which DC has the greatest desire to be met be accorded commensurate award. So when we award the SEU for meeting its goals, we should probably have some priorities set for them, as opposed to all these goals and pick 2 out of 5, or pick, whatever. So, given that we're only an advisory board, we can only recommend which goals might be of greatest priority, but still, it's something we might want to consider doing.
Yes.
And I think this is helpful, Larry, from the gas company's perspective, because the weight given to the statutory goals as interpreted, I think, from my point of view, are a priority. And so some ability to at least recommend how to look at those goals when they don't necessarily, nobody says which one gets the highest weight or whether it's just as important to do this as that. I'd like to have some ability to at least recommend to DDOE to look at that. So if that covers that issue or helps cover it, I think all of
it
these
does. It's the
feed
intention.
into that issue.
All right, so here's really the motion. The Structure and Finance Committee made passive recommendations addressing several of the above obstacles to the SU Advisory Board in 2012, but did not advance any motions for full Advisory Board vote. The attached minutes of the Structure and Finance Committee meetings and a discussion paper from DDOE Council elaborate on the reasoning behind the recommendations. The following phased approach to addressing the obstacles identified above is presented as a recommendation to the SU Advisory Board to make a resolution. So it is a resolution, basically. I'm putting this forward as a motion. For an integrated approach for modifications to the sustainable energy utility that will comprehensively address the identified obstacles. So phase 1, first half of 2013. Through June 2013, a small team of SU Advisory Board members, SU management, and DDOE contract management will meet to draft revised contract language for a future contract program period. Develop consensus on recommendations to amend elements of the Clean and Affordable Energy Act. The revised contract language would revise annual spending requirements and performance assessment to better enable longer-term and deeper efficiency projects that may exceed an annual program year. Characterize necessary conditions to allow a performance period budget to carry forward. Detail which performance measures can serve an annual basis and which should be modified to focus on multi-year performance. Characterize how the reward structure can be modified to ensure that it best rewards the efforts that lead to the most effective program outcomes. And clarify DDOE's responsibility for SU programmatic review or approval. Okay. And provisions in the Clean and Affordable Energy Act that limit the SU's effectiveness include how the SETF...
You have to, excuse me, Larry, for interrupting, but you have to put that as part of the motion, its provisions.
This is kind of informational.
Okay.
No, it doesn't have to be
Right, so
part
the
of
motion would end at approval. That's the motion.
Well, and then there's phase 2 and phase 3.
Okay.
So I'll skip over these provisions. And we can actually take them out of the motion. It's not relevant to the motion particularly.
I mean, in essence, these are the issues that would be
Yeah.
explored.
Discussed at
Yeah.
the meeting.
Right.
Phase 2, in advance of and preparation for the next contract award, the SU Advisory Board will consider the small group's recommendations and pass another resolution, or not.
When will that be up? What's the next contract award period?
I think it's coming up pretty soon, you guys.
Is that for
October.
October 1st?
But you guys would have that contract drafted probably in July, right?
We probably will start as early as July, but we need to make the decision first as to whether we'll execute an option year. Keep in mind, these are one-year contracts, renewable for the next, what we have, 4 more years remaining. So it's a one-year contract. Around about July is when the contracting officer sends out the notice to the contractor with an intent to either exercise an option or not. So right around July, we'll start this conversation.
So if, I guess conceivably, if you didn't exercise another option, you would just be putting out a new request for proposals, essentially a new
Yes,
contract.
we would have to put out a new RFP and so forth.
All right, so probably this would still be relevant then for that.
Yes, it will, but I would like to advise that for the recommendations listed here, there are a number of obstacles associated with them. And I think, the suggestion of getting back in the subcommittee setting to really discuss each of them would be extremely helpful to helping the board understand what are the limitations.
Yeah, and that is the essence of this motion. It kind of goes into a lot of detail, but really to boil it down, it's to set up a small committee, DDOE contract management staff, advisory board folks, and,
You had one more.
yeah, help me out, who was paying attention to what I was saying?
SEU management,
That's you.
He said that.
but, I don't know if I would go in so much
Management.
detail, but
And DDO contract management.
I think you,
So SEU, that would be the difference.
So we might want to shorten this resolution then. And
I
then
like your shortened version that you just had.
All right. And then phase 3, advise DDOE on any adjustments to contract language for out years. And formalize recommendations to the mayor and city council for any amendments to the Clean and Affordable Energy Act.
My only suggestion was that I thought I heard from Lance that maybe it would be helpful for us to do expedited and do it earlier as July, because even the decision in terms of the renewal or what's your phrasing, what did you say?
The option year.
The option year might be helped by that information.
Right.
I don't think that has to go into the resolution, but just to understand that we might want to work on a faster pace.
So I would like to propose that the advisory board take under advisement this long, rather tedious resolution or motion, and that it just be summarized as the advisory board recommend that a small group of DDOE management, contract management, SEU management, and advisory board members meet to talk about the issues identified in the resolution.
I'm not sure if we can have the SCU there if we're talking about a contract.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
we may want to bring them in and have questions to them, but I'm not sure that we can
Okay.
have
Yeah, I think that's a
the
good
current
Fair enough.
contractor
Right, I'd
and
agree
the
with
SCU
that.
there at that point.
Particularly while the-
But we should absolutely consult them and, we see them, but
They're not part of the planning
Right.
team.
they cannot be part of the planning team for a new RFP or for an updated RFP.
Agreed.
So,
This is a subcommittee of an advisory board, meeting with other folks, essentially just to generate ideas and develop some recommendations.
but
It's not actually planning the contract.
it will advise it quite directly. Maybe you can have language that says, and SU management will be consulted or, as required.
Right.
I agree with
Decided
that.
by them.
Absolutely.
I am with Veronique's language.
It becomes a problem from a...
It can become a
It can.
problem
May not
from a
be, but it
legal,
can.
Right.
From a legal point, it could become a
Yes,
problem.
later on, and conflict of interest and that kind of stuff.
God
And
forbid
Larry, I had a question as well, since there's just so much information here. So basically, it will be very much so very general in in the construct, as opposed to, for example, you have number 3, which references statutory requirements as relates to operations, precludes by definition such useful programs, strategies as establishment of a loan loss reserve fund, revolving loan fund, other such long-term institutional funding. Is that just generically providing those as examples? Because there's a lot more detail that would have to be gone into in those particular areas. Also, going back to recommendations as relates to the Council of the District of Columbia, as well as amendments to the Clean and Affordable Energy Act, pursuant to, once again, these annual spending requirements, going back to a broader issue that goes back to the anti-deficiency, et cetera. So are these just going to be recommendations? Because ultimately, a decision would have to be rendered from my perspective as it relates to whether or not the contract could be modified, as well as the law modified pursuant to those overarching requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is similar to what was said earlier, that, the process would be that we'd make some recommendations, and then it would go to the appropriate legal channels within the government, OAG or somewhere, and to sort of say, it's doable or not doable. In some cases it may not be doable, and we just have to live with it. But I think, Larry, from my perspective, this motion, both in its long form and its short form, encompass a lot of what has been raised over time, for several years now, about what's required. And we do want to make sure that the entity is structured for success to the best ability that it can be. So, I'm in support of it.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to pick up on what Donna said, because if you look at, Larry, your first, and I think it's really good analysis of all 4 of the issues and problems that were identified, most of them can't be addressed without a change in legislation.
Right.
And so it's a question of timing. I know you put the legislation for phase 3, and there may be a reason for that. But I would seem to me there'd be just a few things that could be addressed in a new contract or a new out-year contract, but without changing the legislation. Is it most of, spending down the entire annual billing, performance requirements, on an annual basis. I don't know if that's in the contract or the law. Statutory requirements, they spend only on operations, and the structural home. Those are all problems that are created by the way the statute's written, right? And there are some things that can be done within the new contract too, but not a whole bunch. And so I'm just thinking that it's phase 3, so that the timing.
Well, with respect to the timing, it would require us to put this really on a fast track.
Yes.
But I believe the last council session is in July-ish.
Yeah.
So that in theory, if we
Yeah,
were
it's really
able to,
almost
that's like
before that
really,
issue.
right, to get something before them, it would require a lot. And then I had another point that I wanted to make, but if there's something specific to that, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say as Joe was alluding, to put this in context, for those of us, for better or for worse, that have been around a really long time, I believe the law was passed in 2008.
Yes.
And I believe that this group was formed in 2009. And I think we're in the 3rd year of the SEU contract, if I'm not mistaken. So, even though each year has been, 15 million going up to about 20 million, by the time we get to our 5th year, which we're in sight of, we will have spent $100 million of, ratepayer money on this, and want to make sure in the aggregate, however we get there, that that the work that SEU's done and the legislation that was passed and the work was done is that the money's been appropriately spent, that the law has been reviewed, because this happens. Laws are passed and then revisions are made, via, experience with it. And so I really think that this is something we need to move forward on seriously, because we're coming up against our 5-year time frame.
I think, and, you know, Hussein, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can make amendments, you know, whenever we want to, or we agree with the contractor. So I think I want everybody to kind of remember that. And I think we can run in parallel if there are changes needed for the law, and they can run into an auction year, a new contract, depending how all of those are happening. But, you know, the fact that the fiscal year ends in September should not stop us or completely guide how well we take the time to do this job. So I just want to remind people that, you know, there are flexibilities in contract that can be acted upon.
And again, I do want to state that an important first step would be a discussion so you understand what the limitations are before we decide whether we'll go to amending the CAE or even pushing forward the contract amendments. It's just understanding the issues. For example, if you take a look at number 1 and even number 2, number 1, it's not a requirement of the SEU contract. That's probably just a suggestion, but they operate on a reimbursement basis. So if they don't spend all of the money any given year, they're not penalized for that. We just adjust the performance based on the amount that was spent. So that's not a requirement that they have to, you know, whether it's done carefully or it's done recklessly, you know, rush to spend all the dollars. It's reimbursement for costs incurred. So if they haven't incurred a cost, they wouldn't be reimbursed for it. And then as it relates to number 2, the societal benefit tests, we can look at a number of tests as we did when we first formulated this, and we settled on the societal cost test because we thought that was the most appropriate for this operation. If we decide to go to a TRC test, or as suggested here, if we move to a multi-year basis, then that's a number of structural issues related to that. The district would need to first be able to issue a multi-year contract. And then the biggest issue with that is that we don't have all the SETF funds in hand. We collect it as we go. So you can't commit to a multi-year contract short of having the money in hand. So that's why I'm saying there's an important discussion to be had around all of these issues so you fully understand.
That would be
Absolutely. Yeah.
the purpose of.
I mean, to put something in perspective real quickly, I mean, just through February, from inception, my numbers might be off a little bit, we've already spent $28,319,000 worth of ratepayer funds. And, you know, this committee, this particular motion would have us making sure that, as John brought up, the money is spent wisely. It's not our money, it's the ratepayers' money, so we can advise on that. And are the targets the right ones? Because the SEU has missed a lot of the important targets.
So actually, we're going to probably want to move to that.
Okay.
Right, so the motion is a small committee will meet to consider issues identified in the motion long form and to make recommendations expeditiously on the contract and the Clean Affordable Energy Act.
Is there any further discussion?
I have one question or point, and this is just out of an abundance of caution and to make certain that we're clear and transparent and consistent with the discussion regarding the conflict of interest with the SEU management. We have SEU AD members who have contracts with the SEU. And I think that our disclosure requirements does address that, but we need to be clear on the public record that that's the case.
That's correct.
Correct, and plus there is a requirement for recusal from any discussion of issues that relate to that.
Particular. So I think that that's important to the extent that we're discussing the contract.
Oh,
Absolutely.
within that group, that
Yes.
none of those members be, or.
That they're consistent with whatever our disclosure, our conflict of
Yeah.
interest
Bring that.
requirements are. That's it. And with that, I would second the motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any that oppose? Any that abstain? Okay, so moved.
All right, that concludes the recommendations from the Structure and Finance Committee.
Thank you, Larry. Up next, we will have a report from Tetra Tech and EMB findings and report. Ms. Terry Lutz. Do you have a presentation, Ms. Lutz? Or?
I do.
Okay. Let me get the lights. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Good morning, board members and other stakeholders. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys again. We were here last September, if you recall. Carol Sabo, my colleague from Tetra Tech, is also in attendance and will be offering, I guess, input as needed throughout the presentation and in response to any questions that folks may have. So first of all, I wanted to highlight that our effort for the evaluation of the DCSEU programs began in January of this year and went through February with for the data gathering, the evaluation, on-site visits, et cetera, that we'll talk about a little bit more about here in a minute. And then reporting occurred and analysis occurred in the March timeframe. And our focus was primarily on the evaluation of the reported savings, kilowatt hours, megawatts, and MCF for the fiscal year 12 programs, so those end-year results. As well as we did do some preliminary process evaluation of program operations for some specific programs that were contributed more to the overall portfolio savings of fiscal year 12, and then some early look at fiscal year 13. But we've not spent a whole lot of time or effort yet on fiscal year 13. The emphasis was on fiscal year 2012 programs. So as part of that, for our outline, we'll be talking about the portfolio savings profile, how that came in for fiscal year 2012, along with the evaluation activities, a briefing on what was done as a part of our impact assessment, our performance benchmark verified results, and some initial reasonableness review of what those performance benchmarks are. And it sounds as though there's already been a lot of discussion amongst the advisory board and DDOE folks about what those reasonableness of the benchmarks might be. Also, the look at what the actual reported versus verified result came in by each of the sectors within the portfolio for the DCSEU programs. Some early process evaluation findings, and then some thoughts on what the fiscal year 2013 opportunities might be for improving operations, and some next steps as we recommend. So real quick, just the portfolio savings profile. Electric savings primarily is coming from the lighting programs, and that's actually is quite typical for programs, especially programs early in implementation, and I know I brought that up before when we were here in September. Natural gas savings is split between HVAC and water essentially. And then for sector savings, about 64% are coming from the commercial and institutional sector, with 23% from the low-income programs that were implemented and the remainder from the residential programs. So our evaluation activities for our impact and process evaluations. Our first task as evaluators was to take a look at how the savings came in across the portfolio by program, and to prioritize our time and focus and effort to the programs that contributed the most, so that the end result would be more confidence in the result of the overall portfolio in total. We took a look at our population sampling by tracker initiative, so within each of the programs, how best should we stratify our population to get to the best verified savings results. So for example, in the commercial programs where there are fewer programs or projects, prioritizing to ensure that we were able to target the highest contributors of projects within that program. And similarly across the other programs within the portfolio. We did program staff and market actor interviews. The program staff interviews were primarily to get a refresh from what we had done last August, make sure that we understood how the programs operated in fiscal year 12, and to understand if there were any major differences occurring within the time frame in which we were doing our study. The market actor interviews were with our contractors that participate within the programs, as well as retailers, food banks, etc. So getting an understanding from their perspective on how the programs are going and operating. Participant and non-participant surveys were done with two of the programs. We focused on the Clear T12 lighting program because that was the largest contributor to the overall portfolio. And we also took a look at the low-income comprehensive program as a part of that effort. Participant surveys were done with actual customers that participated in the program with respect to the Clear T12. And for the low income, it was with the facility managers that managed the
facilities where projects were implemented. And non-participant surveys were done with customers that had attempted or had started the process through the program, through the Clear T12 or the low income, but at some point never went through and had a project completed within fiscal year 2012. We also did some limited on-site verification within the restricted time frame of essentially February timeframe was for on-site data collection. We were able to get a number of sites verified for home performance with Energy Star, for the Clear T12, for the custom programs, as well as a few home performance and a number of solar programs. Desk reviews and project file reviews we went through each of the project files that we had sampled and took a look at what was in the project file that could support what was actually being recorded within KIT. Were there invoices, were there other supporting files, customer applications, etc., that we could tie out to the KIT to make sure, the tracking system, to make sure that there was adequate and proper documentation that aligned with what was reported in KIT, as well as we took a look at all the TRM, the Technical Reference Manual algorithms, to ensure compliance with how savings are to be calculated and reported. And then engineering analyses were done for the more complex commercial programs, as well as for some of the solar programs that we had a desk review for. We also, GDS Associates, our partner on this project, completed cost effectiveness testing in accordance with the societal cost test that we'll talk a bit more about. And for performance benchmarks, we did do an initial review for reasonableness. We reviewed the page report, I'm sure that everybody's familiar with, and thought about that in concert with some of our experiences in other jurisdictions and what seems reasonable given funding and other constraints or performance benchmark requirements. So for fiscal year 2012, performance benchmark verified results, we are showing the minimum benchmark, the fiscal year 2012 reported value for each of the 6 performance benchmarks, along with the evaluation verified amount and whether or not the benchmark was achieved. And I think folks are probably well aware at this point that the energy per capita energy consumption and natural gas metrics were not achieved. And the increased renewable energy generating capacity, I don't know if folks have had a chance to read that report though, but when you look at the number of projects that were completed through the solar program, that program was not cost effective for fiscal year 2012. For that particular program, it appears that scale is more the issue, that as the program ramps up to where they have around 150 projects per year, then the program does become cost effective.
Can I ask you a question about the analysis? Did you all look at how much was spent on each project, or did you look at how much was spent in total to achieve these programs? How did that cost effectiveness analysis go?
Yes, I mean, Carol, you want to speak to the cost effectiveness, the societal cost test?
Well, the cost effectiveness test was run by measure, but then they were rolled up to the program level, and we were working with costs that were provided to us by BEIC.
By BEIC, right. Yeah. And so I think that your question is more about what costs are included in the societal cost test?
Well, I mean, one of the challenges that this contract faces, of course, is that, we just discussed it, the year end and the funds need to be spent. I was a participating contractor, and a lot of the work that we did in September, which I'm assuming is factored into these goals, but I'm not entirely sure. We were actually, it was invoiced in October. So if you take a look at the performance over time, I'm throwing this number out there, maybe 2.5 million, maybe a little bit less, were actual dollars spent on programs done or work jobs done in fiscal year 2013. So that's why I'm curious, because it would take the overall spend from 13.9 million to 16.4 million to achieve or not the goals that either were achieved or not achieved. That's why, to me, it's important to take into account the entirety of the cost to make sure that the funds were expended efficiently. Again, ratepayer funds, that is not our money.
I'm sorry, you're saying jobs that were completed in September, you guys billed the SEU for it in October?
We were asked to bill October 6th, yes.
even though the job was completed prior to September 30th?
Most of the job was completed, some of them, yes. I don't have the records on all the jobs with me, but
Mostly all the jobs. I've spoken to most contractors.
what?
Boy, it's so nice.
If you build by October 6th, we'll look at September. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying, well, no, there's the two things I'm saying. I'm not sure exactly what it was on invoice, but I know that the spend in fiscal year 2013, October, was a lot higher, and I think that had a lot to do with the prior year. That's why I've asked this question before, both the DDOE and at ECSU. I would like to understand
So,
where the
Joe,
money
Joe,
falls.
what I would like to offer, because I'm not sure it's a good question, not sure we can get into the details of this today, but I think we've heard you, and we have right now the financial review being done for fiscal year 12, and those are things that would come out of it.
Okay, so the
There's
cost,
an independent, there's also the financial audit, and I would think that this would come out.
so the cost benefit analysis, that's why I was asking if, when we talk about cost effectiveness, it's about the money expended. So that's why
But
it's
in
critical.
terms, is it in the right fiscal
Now,
year when it
were
comes
projects,
to
you
will come
know,
out?
the
Let's-
project,
For the interest of time, can we save our questions to the end of this report by Ms. Lutz? And then we can get into those matters. I'd like to get through
But
this
that's,
report.
everyone has
And then we can go into the question, because the SEU has to report next. I know we have about an hour.
Okay. Thank you.
For the reduce the growth in peak demand, that kind of benchmark was achieved, as was the improving the low energy and, or the energy efficiency and low income housing with the 30% spend. The actual results actually came in, as far as evaluation verified, at 32%, so there was a slight adjustment in how some of those dollars were treated in our verified effort versus how they had been reported, but not enough to go below the 30% threshold. So reduce the growth in energy demand for the largest energy users, as you all know, is that metric's not yet defined. And then increasing the number of green collar jobs. The DEOE, in fact, verified number is 41. We did not duplicate the effort of the DDOE given their thorough review of the documentation. Yes.
In the two items that were achieved, I see that your evaluation lowered what was reported. Was that feedback given to the SEU so that they can adjust, so that they count it correctly in the future?
Yes, it was, and we'll go through that a little bit more when we get to the actual program evaluation slides. So the performance benchmarks, the initial reasonableness review. For the electric and natural gas savings, and I've heard a lot of discussion here this morning that 1% annual target is really quite difficult to achieve, especially in light of what funding levels are and the other constraints or performance benchmark requirements for that 1% target. For the renewable programs, as I mentioned, the program does become cost effective when scale is increased and there's additional projects that are implemented within the district. That's about 150 units based on what was done in fiscal year 2012 and those factors and assumptions that went into that analysis.
Excuse me, can I go back in the first one? Are you saying for fiscal year 2013 or forever? I mean, the way you stated it orally is as if the target is too high and would never be able to get made, but the way it's written up there, it's for fiscal year 2013.
Yes, our look right now is going forward to fiscal year 2013. That was our review.
But you're not saying the goal is set too high generally, that it could never be met by any contractor. You're just saying it won't be met in the next fiscal year.
That's been our assessment. We haven't looked forward, so I don't really want to speak to that. But, as over time, other utilities and other jurisdictions have shown that 1% certainly is achievable with other factors in place. So it's not saying that it's never achievable, but we truly have not looked at that in detail going forward.
I have a question, but we're holding it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're holding our questions.
Alrighty, so for the peak demand of fiscal year 2012, the area of 2 megawatts was exceeded and actually has been hit in the first 5 months of fiscal year 13. So that one, is, I guess you could argue, set too low in concert with what is actually achievable through the energy savings programs that are also being implemented. The low income allocation is reasonable, that has been demonstrated to be achievable. The lowest, or the largest energy users, we do want to take a more review and engage and assist the DDOE and the board in whatever way we can in helping with that determination. For green jobs, we do think that the performance benchmark is set a bit high. However, there are some additional things we could be doing. The continued tracking, I think at this point in time is a good idea so that we can gather additional information and data to do a more thorough analysis, as well as take a look at what's going on with the workforce training and development, performing an assessment there to see how effective and what is actually being achieved and quantified through that effort. And then perhaps some assessment of the indirect and induced jobs. Those, as I'm sure everybody here knows, are typically hard to measure and report, but it certainly is something that is a benefit from having these programs in place that might warrant at least some discussion and or recognition of some manner. That's okay. So the portfolio verified results, and this plays more into your question about the feedback based on those lower verified amounts or ex post gross savings versus the ex ante gross. And when we say ex ante gross here, we just mean that that's what had been reported through KIT, and that it does not have a net to gross factor applied except for the case of solar and renewable energy programs. Ex post gross has been through the verification process. And the realization rate is just dividing your ex post, what we have verified, by your ex ante, or what was reported, come up with the realization rates. We actually did a realization rate establishment for each one of the programs. That's a lot of detail to present here, so I thought it would make sense for us to roll it up by sector. Looking at the residential for KWA, the realization rate was 0.92. For KW, 0.93, and for gas, 0.95. Low income, for KWH, 0.91, KW 0.89, and gas savings, 0.96. For commercial, 0.93 for the KWH, 0.97 for KW, and 1.02 for gas savings. And then on the renewable side, 1.01 for both KWH and KW, and gas wasn't reported, so not applicable. So overall, at the portfolio level, when you sum all of the reported savings and sum all of the verified savings, the ratio that you'd get for KWH is 0.92, whereas KW is 0.95, and for gas savings, 0.99. What primarily, and just to give some context to those numbers, they're quite comparable to what we see in neighboring jurisdictions. For example, in Pennsylvania, in the first year of operations for the state as a whole, the KW realization rate was about 0.85. Or I'm sorry, that was for KW. It was about 0.95 for KWH and for KW 0.85. And in Maryland, it was a little lower than that. So the 0.92, 0.95, and 0.99 realization rates really are comparable and about where you would expect a program, especially early in operation, to be hitting. So we actually consider those to be quite accurate, that the reported savings are accurately being calculated and accurately being reported in aggregate. However, there are some issues within programs, and that's what leads to some of the lower realization rates. Some of the primary drivers of those lower realization rates are just the misallocation of savings, perhaps to electric rather than gas that required some adjustments. Some TRM savings calculations that weren't done quite correctly, where values may have been flipped from one sector to another, or from one profile to another profile, those sorts of things. And that information is all detailed and has been provided to the DC, SEU, as well as to DDOE. Yes, please. So early process evaluation findings. And I do want to preface this by stating, as a part of this evaluation, again, our focus was on impact and verifying the results that are actually reported for savings with some initial process evaluation. With process evaluation, though, you often find as you're going through impact, you're going to identify things that are process related that we can also speak to. But the process evaluation effort was not as robust as the impact analysis was for this initial effort. So we don't want to quantify our results, and keep in mind that our samples and the folks that we talked to, et cetera, were smaller than what we would normally do for a full-blown process evaluation. But nonetheless, we thought there were some things that were worth speaking about with the group. So first of all, the portfolio of programs is cost effective, and the DCSU cost effectiveness test results are confirmed. When we did the cost effectiveness testing and compared between the VEIC or the DCSU cost effectiveness model for the societal cost test and GDS Associates model, they did find some differences in how some of the costs were treated. So the two models were normalized to ensure comparable results for the VEIC or DCSU output as well as for the GDS output. And that is detailed and more in the reports. But overall, the DCSCU with the normalized treatment of costs and benefits was 2.22, and the GDS model was 2.16, and that's at the portfolio level. And then results overall are tracked and reported accurately, as I already mentioned. The realization rates between 92 and 99% is comparable and actually not a concern at this stage of the game. Realization rates are consistent with other states. The DCSU tracking and estimation tools are transparent and robust. As a part of the desk review, we did look into each of the different calculation tools to make sure that they were understandable, that they made sense, that they complied with the TRM, and there were no concerns found with any of that. The DCSU technical reference manual is a good foundation, but we do think there is some opportunity to expand, especially if it is the objective of the DDOE and the DCSU advisory board to report savings more accurately. There's a few instances where savings are modeled for an average across the board rather than applying some additional information that could result in more robust savings, or such as CFL wattages. It's an easy thing, that information's available. It could be part of the kit in the actual calculations for savings to come up with a result that is more in line with what actually was achieved. And participants and contractors that we've spoken with are generally satisfied with the programs, with the interaction with participants, with contractors, and contractors with the DCSU staff. So a few things that we have heard from our discussions with our contractors in particular, that the fiscal year contracts and annual budgets are challenging to manage in conjunction with commercial institutional programs, and I did hear that discussed already here as part of the discussion earlier. The hot and cold implementation cycles make it difficult for contractors to retain employees. This was brought up when speaking with the Clear T12 contractors in particular, that they would get their employees on board, they would have funding, and then they wouldn't. And then they'd have funding, and then they wouldn't. So that's what they were referring to as that hot and cold cycle. DCU branding awareness is near non-existent with program participants. So this one actually I found a little bit surprising, but it became apparent that there really is no brand of DCSCU out. Even with people that have participated in the programs, they weren't sure who we were when we would call to schedule appointments. They didn't understand the connection of our evaluation effort in conjunction with the DCSCU. So they're really missing that connection and that awareness. And then ongoing program reporting requires improvements to more easily monitor progress. I think the reports are getting better, but the level of detail that I think is really needed to support decision making and to better understand program performance can be expanded and be more robust to help us as evaluators, but then also to help you as board members and other stakeholders truly understand what's working and what isn't within the portfolio. So some fiscal year 2013 opportunities. One of the things I know that we've been asked to do is, and as part of our reasonable assessment was, well, if the 1% isn't a reasonable target for savings or for gas, then what is? And with lacking a robust assessment of what potential is within the district, it does make that determination and that assessment a bit more elusive. But one of the things that is posed for consideration is conducting a market potential study to truly quantify what your market is for electric and gas savings within the district.
Yeah, we're doing that as part of the comprehensive energy plan.
Awesome, we'll look forward to those results. And then the second would be conducting a robust assessment of the marketing and branding effort. And I do know that some of that was done just, I think, as a part of the end of this, or the beginning of fiscal year 13. I saw just a write-up in that, so those would be great to see. So it sounds like, so this is a good sign, right? So these are things that we as evaluators were thinking would be great to do, and folks are already undertaking those. So I think that speaks to the level of engagement and really, I guess, understanding of folks in the room about where they are and why. Examine methods to ensure programs can operate steadily throughout the fiscal year to avoid that hot and cold cycle, or the cold, very hot cycle. Conduct a workforce training and development assessment and a more in-depth green job impact goal. So, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about this, the performance, we understand there's a lot of training going on already that the DCESU is engaged in. So the idea is to understand how effective each of those different components of that training is in getting folks up to speed, getting them employable within the district, and then retaining them within that green economy within the district. And then establishing a work group to define a standard reporting format for the monthly, quarterly, and annual reports to be used for all programs. This actually is, the work group for reporting requirements is pretty typical. When I was with the utility in Maryland, we had a workforce just identified for to identify what those reporting requirements would be. You bring together the different stakeholders and talk about what each needs are, and then come up with something that's workable and manageable and not overly time-consuming or costly to implement. Did you have a question?
You answered it. Sorry.
And so this is the final slide. We did take a quick look. Once we concluded the fiscal year 12 impact evaluation, we did do just a very preliminary look at what fiscal year 13 is looking like. So for the megawatt hours and the KW, the demand reduction goals, for the megawatt hours, the first 5 months, they're almost out to where they ended fiscal year 12 then. So looking promising. I mean, it's certainly going to exceed where they ended up fiscal year end, which is great. The probably not so good news, but probably not surprising news either, is that the overall 13 target is looking out of reach. And for the megawatt hours, again, as you see, they've already hit their target, and they are about where they were at the end of fiscal year 12 in the first 5 months. So I think there is some opportunity there if it's, even for the board makes sense to have that megawatt target, consider adjusting, probably upward.
You mean the kilowatt?
The kilowatt,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yes. And then MCS, when the data that we had available at that point in time, we didn't have the MCF data absent the penalties for the waste heat factor and for the lighting program, so the curve is to the negative. So I didn't bother showing that on here, but it's quite likely that goal will not be met.
That's the gas.
That's for the natural gas.
I think it doesn't help not to put it on here. Because I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
When you're spending gas ratepayers' money and you don't even bother to present it because it's not likely to be met, that's not, it's not transparent and it's problematic. So I would suggest that this be revised and added in here.
And we can certainly do that. And it wasn't so much that I didn't show it because it wasn't likely to be met, but more because I didn't have the data to be able to show the true savings gas programs. I only had the
Well,
total
there should
amount
be
within
something
negatives.
on there to reflect. I mean, we're spending millions of dollars of ratepayers' money, and it's not, you can't even reflect it, so please.
Nothing to reflect,
Yeah, I know,
But
but
that's
that
an absence. It should be there.
It should be stated on the
Yeah.
presentation, that's just terrible.
Okay.
Can
I
you,
definitely agree.
One more question, sir.
can you, terms of the cost effectiveness, can you show us the cost, the amount that's been spent, and then monetize the impact of the savings, and however you do that? You know, if we spend $20 million, we're getting back, you know, you can monetize the,
Oh, yes, I don't have that information available, but that, yes, we could take it as a request and provide that.
and what do you think that would turn out to be?
Carol, did you hear the question?
Yeah,
So
I
the
did.
monetized value for the cost
What'd you
effectiveness
say,
for
Joe?
fiscal year
We're
12?
holding.
Are you interested in fiscal year 12 or 13 first 5 months?
Well, no, I was thinking of, for 12, and if you could do the same, you know, you have the data to do it for 13. But isn't that wouldn't that be a major interest and factor here?
Yeah, I
believe so.
Yeah.
We're almost finished with the presentation. If we could wrap it up so we can open the floor up to comments, questions, and comments.
Okay, so for our next steps, real quick then, for April, we're assessing those first 6 months. Actually, we will have the 6 months data available here in the next couple of weeks to take a look at what the actual 6 months are. And we will have that level of detail then to be able to do the additional breakouts for the MCF to understand that metric a bit better. In May, finalizing the DDOE and SEU Advisory Board evaluation priorities, so understanding where we can provide the most value to the board and to the DDOE and DCSEU in the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year. We do have some summer 2013 evaluation plan activities that make sense to conduct in the summer. For example, verification of cooling systems. You do the metering in the summer, so there's some of those activities we'd like to undertake for those larger cooling projects. Updating the DCSU MOU framework based on the fiscal year 2012 findings, so taking a look at where can the framework be adjusted to better reflect where priorities might be based on those findings for fiscal year 12, as well as the first 6 months of 2013. And then drafting those fiscal year 13 evaluation plans and budget in June, reporting the summer 2013 evaluation activity results for what activities were actually conducted during fiscal year 13 for fiscal year 13, and then submitting a final DCSU 13 evaluation plan and energy framework at the end of September.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Open up the floor to staff for questions, Larry.
So I take it that you're asking for recommendations on what you might do in the second half of the year that might be helpful to us. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
So can you provide a rationale for what is a reasonable expectation for percent decrease in energy demand, kilowatt hours? You say that our current expectation may be too high. So can you give us a rationale, not here now, but over the next couple months or something, for how we might better target a reasonable decrease in kilowatt hour demand?
Yes.
And also the natural gas.
Well, I mean, I didn't hear her saying that, so my comment would be, what I heard you say is that, in general, the 1% is something that has been accomplished in other jurisdictions.
Over time.
And over time. So I did not hear that the 1% was necessarily too high. I know you wanted a market, potential study, which is something that Larry and others would be involved in.
Yeah.
And that could be done, but I didn't hear you saying the 1% was not reasonable. I guess my question would be, though, given the track record on the gas side, would it be more effective for the SEU to just concentrate on electric programs and remove the gas as an objective in the gas funding? Or do you see that this is going to be something they can overcome in terms of getting up to speed? It seems like they're moving at least in the right direction on the electric side, but do you see it possible for them to get up to speed on the gas side?
I really think that will depend on what the outcome of the potential study is. Without knowing and having that quantified for the district, it's really hard to state whether it should go away completely or should it remain in a reduced form. That's what the potential study would help to inform. Carol, did you have a thought?
Well, actually, going back to the comment about the 1%, I think just to clarify, I think the example was Vermont, Efficiency Vermont. I think it took them 5 years with a fairly aggressive program to get up to that 1%. So, when we look at DC and say, can you get to 1% and when, we have to consider some of the unique barriers that you also have within the district, which it sounds like you're going to try and deal with, contractually and perhaps in changing, the legislative mandates at some point. So
I had a follow-up on that particular point. Is there a way, going back to the 1% and the variables that ultimately are not contributing to them achieving that particular goal, is there a way to ultimately base it on statistics and methodology, maybe utilizing some of the same points that we have already looked at that are barriers and relate them to them not meeting that 1% ultimately in terms of presenting that information to us?
Well, isn't that what the market penetration study would do?
Yeah.
Pardon me? Yeah.
Will it do that? Will it accomplish that?
We're hoping it will accomplish setting us, telling us part of that. And again, I think the market potential study, I don't know, Lance, if you want to add anything, but will, really help us with, these issues with benchmark, the SEU.
Yeah, the potential.
But my point is ultimately, like, based on the data that you have already retrieved, ultimately, and you have already cited specifically what they have met in 2012 and what those particular shortcomings, and maybe there's a barrier with me understanding what you're saying. I'm looking for a way in terms of utilizing data ultimately specific to the categories that we have identified and really attributing that to ultimately how they may not have met those particular marks for each of the categories that we have ultimately identified.
So what I think I hear you saying is that you would like us to quantify the
Exactly.
impact of those benchmarks
Exactly.
and achievement of the overall savings
Correct.
target.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your name?
Colin Shea.
Hold on. We're gonna go to Joe and then Colin. We're gonna come to you, okay?
So, yeah, I held the questions here. I'll try to be brief. When you say, given the current funding level and it's not achievable, one of the things that I think would be helpful to look at is the percent of the projects that were direct spend or substantially direct spend versus market participation. Because the way I've always viewed the SEU funds, and I'm going to use a term, from my banking days, I view it as equity that can be leveraged. So let's say you've got very good return on investment projects that the market will participate in. Is it 20% copay, 30% copay? So that would elevate the funding that the SEU uses without even thinking about the loan loss reserve significantly. So looking at that funding level between percent of direct spend versus percent of market participation to increase that number. I don't really think it's reasonable to say what that target should be until that study essentially is done. The DC market is substantially different than lots of other markets. It's got a very large built environment. And I'll just throw a number out there. A quarter of it is influenced by GSA, which is driving energy efficiency. And so for people to be able to be in some of these buildings may require it. So looking at that built environment would be very important to look at the reasonableness of what can be achieved. When you say the portfolio programs are cost effective, I'll go back to that point I made earlier. I would, and I think we have to wait for some of the financial studies that are being done. What costs are in there? Is it all inclusive in terms of additional overhead or indirect costs? And does it take into account what is, in my opinion, a spend in the first month of October, the first month of fiscal year 2015, to look at that cost effectiveness? Yeah, so those are the points or questions that would be helpful for me to be looked at to see if the money is being spent properly and if the market opportunities are. Make sense?
Thank you. Do you have a response to that?
I was just going, we can definitely provide the details that goes into the cost effectiveness testing. That currently is not part of the report as far as all the inputs go.
Okay.
That we can provide that will not be a problem. I don't know that I'd be able to speak to how inclusive it was based on that October spend, but we could investigate that and find out. I'm sure the DCSU could let us know.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, my question back to the 1% is that I think one of the things you had up there was is that this is somewhat of a recurring theme here, which is the current funding isn't enough to reach the 1%. And my question really is in reverse, which is the current funding fine and the target fine, but the way we're measuring it wrong. And it's not allowing the SEU to take a holistic approach to the energy efficiency curve. And it should be measuring energy efficiency on energy, not on its siloed kilowatt hour, megawatts, MCF approach. It should be okay to move somebody from electricity to renewable, or from electricity to natural gas, and it should not be considered a load-building program for the fuel that is, and so I guess from an EMV perspective, do you have any thoughts with that?
Carol, do you have any thoughts on?
In other words, you're saying, should fuel switching be allowed as part of, the program? And I think that's probably more of a policy issue.
Yes, it is. And if you go back to our history, those were some of the discussions we had from the inception. It was a big debate between whether we should be counting energy efficiency as a whole or splitting it between gas and electric. And we kind of erred on having those two savings, the kilowatts and the MCFs. In a real world, in a perfect sense, it would be energy efficiency across the board, but given how we're funded and given the discussions we had, we decided to split the two. To answer your first question, though, the issue of funding is a major issue here. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get to 1% based on how the funding is divided. Right now, 80% of the funds come from the electric company, 20% of the fund comes from the gas company. And to get to 1% on only 20% of the money, which is for this year roughly $3.4 million, that's a heavy lift. Right now, the SEU would be required to leverage at least 5 or 6 to 1 to be able to get anywhere close to that 1%.
And that gets back to my question, whether we ought to just remove gas from the goal, because it really can't be met with that constraint, because that's a constraint that's tied to, it's tied to the legislation and the way it is set up. And if the programs can be more effective and that you can get better electric efficiency just by removing that, then maybe we ought to just focus on that. Vermont didn't have gas, so I'll take it back to that. They had propane, but not gas. So, I'm just wondering whether that is a realistic goal, given the way it's set up.
And I would say that we should adjust the benchmark for the gas saving, giving the funding level as opposed to removing it completely.
Yeah, I would suggest that that's also probably the way that we would look at it, at least as a first step.
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not, I don't think that it's appropriate to consider removing the requirement for gas savings completely, but clearly the numbers show that number needs to be adjusted.
There'll be time for a lot of discussion. There'll be time for a lot of discussion on that topic alone, but I need to move on. I'm going to take Chairman Kane's question, and then we're going to hear from the SEU.
Yeah, first I would say, actually, given what's happening with the price of gas, from a consumer point of view and an environmental point of view, we'd probably be best off encouraging the increased use of gas and reduced use of electricity, just because, or fuel switching. But my question really was on the renewables and on a general question that your conclusion on the renewables, which was very specific, that 150 projects was needed to make it, quote, cost-benefit analysis effective. And it goes to a larger question, how you filter out which projects are, as savings are a result of actions by the SEU and programs versus which projects just happen for other reasons and reductions in use happen for other reasons. Because our figures, for example, at the commission show that in fiscal 2012, we actually certified that those were projects that were completed, installed, interconnected, certified, registered with PJM, GATS, 170 solar PV and solar thermal projects, but that's not all. That's not the same projects. And there was an increase in the 3 megawatts of capacity in the district, which presumably would be then a savings attributable to those projects. But how do you, in your evaluation process, filter out those kinds of savings in use that that are occurring because of other factors, and specifically, are attributable to an action by the SEU.
Well, that's part of an attribution assessment or analysis to determine, free ridership and or spillover. So I think, in fact, I believe I read that in one of the recent monthly reports that there, in addition to the actual programs that were funded within certain neighborhoods by the DCSEU, other homeowners took advantage of the technology, but not through the DCSU program to install projects because they saw the benefits. So that would be spillover. And then the other is, well, who is taking advantage of these programs but would have done it anyway without the DCSEU contribution. I think with the low-income focus for the fiscal year 2012 renewable programs, that's not an issue. I mean, these wouldn't have occurred without the DCSU funding. As the program expands to include, or should it expand to include non-low-income customers, then that's an assessment that we can do as evaluators to get to how much is actually attributable to the program and how much would have occurred outside the program. And that once you've got that quantified, you can net out the results of customers that would have participated anyway. So they would not become part of, in this case then, it would be ex post verified net savings, not just at the gross level as we reported now. But keep in mind, for the solar programs as a part of this analysis, there is an adder of 15% for the spillover effect. So this analysis does include some benefit and lift to the savings based on spillover. And that was, a discussion
And
with
does
the
the data you have enable you to determine not only, 150 was very specific, so you must have had some numbers that said 150 would go positive. The size of the projects, 150 4-kilowatt, roof things versus 10, 5, megawatt big roof ones.
Right, the 150 estimate was based on really the average of what got installed for fiscal year 2012 and projected out for scale. So what point did cost effectiveness become, or did the program become cost effectiveness once they reached a certain scale? So it was just really a simple estimate.
I'm going to take one more, and we need to maybe facilitate a way that the board members can leave questions to Terry. Moving on, but I have to get to the SEU.
Yeah, on the renewable, real quick, I'd like to, without incentives from, let's say, the SU for renewables, there's already a significant benefit that homeowners can get, with the tax breaks, the accelerated depreciation, and the SRECs. I mean, just looking at a simple project, you're talking without any incentives, a 21% return on investment for the money. So what would be useful to see is how much money was put into each project, because if you don't need to put that much into each project, but rather spread it out, you may be able to get more participation on the renewable. So you have a $12,000 project, someone put $11,000 into it, that's a 471% IRR. Who won't take that? Of course, the contractors or the homeowners would be happy with that. So perhaps looking at renewable is how much of an incentive is put in place to spread that money around to increase the number of projects. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Terry. I'm sorry, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. You mentioned that, you thought that the goals were rather high and perhaps in particular for gas use. But I wondered if you had any comments in terms of structurally, because you had a 1% reduction for electricity, a 1% reduction for natural gas. You had a situation where not everybody in the city uses natural gas, and you've got a high efficiency situation for natural gas to begin with. So, for example, you've got thousands of multifamily units that are going in now. Most of them are not using any natural gas. So, how even, is this possible? I mean, structurally, there are so many challenges. Whereas we see at the gas company about a 1% efficiency per year reduction in use among our own customers. So we have this odd situation where, you're in the entire city, many of whom don't use natural gas.
And just wondering if you have any thoughts on the new structure, what one,
Well,
there are opportunities, and we, clearly want to help you with gas, well, we're gas, but we can.
So much. I mean, it's a legitimate issue.
I wasn't quite sure what the question was, but I heard you talk about just what might be achievable within the district, given you have new construction going in without, that are all electric, there's no gas, et cetera. And that really, quantifying what's achievable and what makes sense would be all part of what would come out of your potential market study.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that, I would think, would take into consideration those factors.
Thank you, Terry, so much. Ted, we want to move over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I don't want to spill the beans on the
Thanks to Terry and Carol in that excellent presentation. The remaining materials that I have to present this morning actually will not take a lot of time. So if you see me kind of move quickly over a slide or two, it's only because I think it's going to be redundant of some of the information you've already heard from the prior presentation. But I would like to try to cover about 5 areas in the amount of time that I have left. I want to talk about our savings that we've achieved to date in FY13, talking about really through the first 5 months of FY13. Talk about our spend pattern. I know that that's been a concern that's been consistently raised by the advisory board. Talk about that, show where we are this year. Speak to operational maturity. I know this is a theme that's also very important to all of you. Talk about 2 programs where we think we've made some significant strides and where we have some significant challenges in front of us. And then finally ask the advisory board on about 4 different levels about some areas where we might further engage and have some discussion. Not for answers today, but something you might want to think about that might help us inform our programming as we move forward in FY13. This is a shot of where we are as of the end of February. That's the last month for which we actually have data to accurately measure where we are. And if you can see this here, I know that the print's a little bit small, but let me show you what we're trying to illustrate. By the end of February in FY12, this was our energy savings here on the electric side. By the end of February in FY13, our current fiscal year, you can see how much we have grown the amount of energy savings we've been able to achieve. Similarly, the chart on your right shows you gas savings, what we achieved through February of FY12. So it's kind of a year-to-year snapshot of what we did in FY12 versus where we are now in FY13. As we like to brag around the halls in the office, we have snagged a big whale on the gas side, which will significantly help us boost some of the gas savings that we will be achieving this year.
What was that, Ted?
Well, I can't talk about customers specifically, but it was a university. Okay. The slide on your right shows you, again, year to year, where we were through the end of FY12 in terms of spending. By the end of February in FY12, we had spent 21% of our budget as well. Conversely, this year you can see after 5 months we have spent about 46% of our budget, again, trying to keep the budget and the projections in line and trying to spend within clearly by the end of FY, I think our bill last month was slightly over $1.1 million. So this is keeping in line with a more of getting rid of the hockey stick, so to speak, and a more level spending pattern.
All right, sorry, I was going to hold my question on that, but I just can't. To me, the spending, you do have a hockey stick, and you have it again. I've been told now it's a U. The U just makes up 2 ends of a hockey stick. I'd like to know, I can't even read this way, but $3,554,000 was spent in the month of October. Then that dropped to 900, 600, then 1.1, so a significant decrease. I'd like to know what percentage of that 3.5 million is attributable to projects done last year, which would definitely, the spend, you spent more money, but some of it, I believe, was a spillover. In essence, there's still not a lot of money being spent on some programs, and contractors are waiting for and I'm sure you'll tell us.
Right, exactly. I understand contractors are waiting for us to revise the T12 program and some other programs. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Shortly,
All right,
absolutely.
thanks.
Okay. Here you go. to the year-to-date. The blue line here, bad hockey expression for those of you who are hockey fans like I am, but the blue line here shows FY12 spending, and the green line shows our forecast for FY13. The red line actually shows where we are year-to-date. So that's kind of, again, trying to smooth out that spending pattern. Joe, your comment is very well taken. Absolutely. I understand
I've asked
exactly
for I've asked for the forecast numbers repeatedly, just so that we actually know what they are, as opposed to a chart.
And I'm going to get
Okay.
into the exact numbers in a second, okay?
All right, thanks.
Just try. Go ahead. On the electric side, on the pie chart on the right of it, it'll show you the spending through February of FY13, and it'll show you the remaining of the spending that we need to do in FY13 on the electric side. There's good news and bad news in both of these charts. Similarly, this chart here will show you what we have yet to spend. This larger pie, well, for the gas side, is what we have yet to spend, and the 19% here shows you what we have spent thus far. Let me show you the good news, bad news here. The good news on the electric side is, although we have $2.9 million yet to spend, we probably have about $7 million in projects that are actually under contract, ready to go. We don't have that much money to spend over here. The bad news on the gas spend side is we've got about $1.8, $1.9 million to spend, maybe with only about $700,000 in projects where we could actually say, okay, we have these under contract and they're ready to go. This is one of these areas, and we'll get to it in a little while, where I would like the advisory board's help, like some thought about how we might increase spending on this side. Okay. Next slide. Again, this is showing you pipeline in gas. It is, we have some, like I said, rather large projects that we've been reeling in lately. The numbers are looking a lot better, but still, like I said, there is much room for improvement on the gas side. We know we have some challenges there in front of us. Next. On the operational maturity side, let me just make a few points about some of this has already been made. The 2.16 cost effectiveness, we believe, is a very good number. Tetra Tech put some context around that 2.16 out of what, or like if my daughter came home with a 2.16 GPA, she'd be spending some time in the room and not out in the streets. But this 2.16, we believe would allow my daughter to keep on exercising the Saturday night festivities that she's been a little bit too good at these days. And Donna and I laugh at each other, but Donna has a son who's a senior in high school as well, and so we're trying to figure out where these kids are going to go in the fall. On the net benefits, and Dan, I think this is the question you were asking earlier about the net benefit. What is the net benefit thus far of what we've been able to produce as an organization?
This is fiscal year 2013?
These are 13.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And you see that number.
This is 12.
Oh, these are 12? Okay, sorry. Good.
So that,
13, yeah, clearly isn't fully in.
So I'll go back to that point. I want to know how much of this October goes into last year, because it would essentially show about $16.5 million spent to achieve at least that net benefit.
Developing leveraging opportunities, and this one is a big one here, Sue. As you know, we have discussed this on a couple of different levels. When I first met with you guys, I think my very first meeting, when we talked about some of the leveraging opportunities, and one particularly that was available to us through the Federal Home Loan Bank, allowing us to leverage $1 million in resources in to help low-income, single-family homeowners improve the energy efficiency in their homes. That program is up and running. It's got its fits and starts, and I'm not going to say it's perfect yet, but that program is up and running. We're developing a pilot project with something called PAIR. This is the Poland Foundation, Abe Poland, as you remember from the Horizon Center. Developing a pilot project with them to do some commercial leveraging, so we could do some unsecured loans at a low interest rate for commercial projects. That's what the PAIR opportunity is right here. On the staff side, we've been working with, I'm sure you know Jigger,
Yeah.
the Carbon War Room and people, to help us with that one. On the staff side, we're proud to announce, and I know this has been a long time coming, but we have hired a director of account management, a manager of engineering, I'm very proudly to say, who is a graduate of the school that my daughter will be attending this fall, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And on the residential services side, we've hired a manager of business energy services, and we've relaunched this program as well with some increased gas measures in the program. It's one of the efforts we're trying to make to help us increase our gas spend and our gas savings along this metrics. And finally, I talked to Veronique on Friday, but I've had conversations with Lance and Teresa as well as with the director about exploring program integration opportunities with not only district government agencies, this government, but also some nonprofits. We're doing some programming with the Public Service Commission later on this month. We did some programming, of course, with Austin People's Council last year. And so we're continuing to explore these opportunities to more fully integrate our programs with district agencies and other nonprofits here in the city. Okay. We've completed 2 low-income multifamily solar projects this year. We have 4 more in the pipeline that we are very confident we will be able to complete by the end of FY13. On the efficient products side, if you look at the second number here, it'll show you how many of the CFLs we were able to sell in FY12. As you can see, we've more than doubled that number in the first 5 months alone of FY13. These products are available in 40 different retailers around the city now, and we're continuously looking to expand partnerships in that as well. And then we will be relaunching the food bank aspect of the distribution of these CFLs probably later this month. On the product offerings as well, of course, maybe you've seen them if you've been to some of the stores. We have rebates available, $5 and $10 rebates for LED lighting. We have $50 rebates available for clothes washers and refrigerators. We are exploring window unit air conditioners and some other items, and also some gas items that we can put in this rebate category as well. So this is something that will continuously be expanding and coming back to report to you about how we're moving in that area. We're very, very proud. Last week, or before last, to have received the Energy Star Sustained Excellence Award from the Environmental Protection Agency. It was a really, really big ceremony last week over at the Marriott Boardman Park. Very proud of that award. And we are increasing our home performance with Energy Star projects. I'll show you some numbers, hopefully, on this next slide. There'll be the one after that. With the business energy rebates, let me just briefly again describe exactly what this is. This is a form that allows a business owner to look at well over 100 different efficiency measures that they might want to install in their building, in an office. They can download this form, they go and install the measures themselves, up to $5,000 worth of measures. This isn't limited. After about $5,000 worth, we would prefer that the customer actually come and talk to us about a custom program. But for some of the smaller projects that people typically do in smaller, mid-sized businesses, they can just download this form and install the measures. And this program has been very, very popular with businesses here in the District of Columbia. With our gas program, we are, of course, working with our largest energy users. I told you about the whale that we landed relatively recently, and that one project would be about 38% of our C&I goal, not our goal for the overall sustainable energy utility, but just the C&I goal. It's a very substantial project. On the T12 transformation, we held last year, as you'll recall, and because many of you had work and knew about this, we went out and took out old T12, the fluorescent lights, took out the ballast and installed new ballast and T8, high-efficient T8 light. This is a program where we have a substantial number of contractors, contractors, yes, a substantial number of customers who are still looking for us to perform work. We were not able to fulfill all of the requests for work that we had last year. And what we're looking at doing this year is doing a customer share of about a 70-30 split. We had contractors come in and give us some feedback about whether or not they thought this would work. We hired our business energy services manager to help us work with this. We've revised our budget so that we can make sure that we have enough money to spend in this category. This program is scheduled to launch later this month.
So, quick question on this. So the 70-30 would be 70% SEU funds, 30 the customer?
That's correct.
So the $7 million in contract, does it take into account that share? In other words, if you have $2 million left to spend, did you divide that by 0.7 to get to what the real potential is
No,
there?
actually, I think that was probably based on 100%.
Okay, so you actually have more money to spend, and obviously the more customer participation you get, the higher it is. So
Absolutely.
the leverage piece isn't just getting money or the foundations, which is
Right.
phenomenal, but getting more customers to participate. On the $7 million that you have, do you have what the IRR or ROI is on each of those projects?
For the customer, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, oh yes.
Okay.
We always do that for the customer.
So it'd be helpful to see, because I think they have some tremendous returns, and customers, quite frankly, ought to be putting, more money into it.
Yeah, right. And the way we approach this with the customer is we would show them up front exactly what they're investing. We think that's very important to let a customer understand if you're putting in 30% or putting in a different number. We can do the calculations.
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
I think it's a great move. I would try to push as much customer participation as possible to increase that money, but I'm sure you guys did your studies.
These are just some snippets of some press that we've received over the last month or so. I talked about the Energy Star Award. Tom Sherwood did a blog in his notebook in the current newspapers talking about the CFLs that we're selling. Particularly, he talked about the ones at Rodman's drugstore. He seemed to like that. For some reason, didn't talk about Frager's Mat and Chair. I'm sorry about that, which is closer to his home. But anyway, we won't go there. But some good press recently. We're trying to get these are all earned media pieces. We're trying to get about 4 of these a month to help increase the brand awareness for the organization. I want to compliment Hannah Green, who's been working very closely, and George Nichols, who've been working both very closely on this. Maybe some of you heard me on WAMU weekend, not this past weekend, the weekend before that, talking about our energy efficiency programs and what we've been doing. So, but we've been making a much stronger push in this area, and we've redone our website. It will go through some more tweaks relatively soon, so you can see some more improvements there as well. And finally, I think there are some areas where, as an advisory board, we might further engage each other. We might get into a higher level of engagement. Of course, we've talked about on the gas spending side and what we might be able to do to as you saw the opportunity earlier in the slides, we have some financing there, some money there where we need to spend on the gas side. We want to talk about that. Accounting for the jobs that are being created, there was a discussion about that earlier. Right now, we're only looking at spending on direct jobs, but we know that there are another layer or 2 of jobs that are being created through the resources that we are putting into the economy here in the District of Columbia. We would like to talk about that. Identifying and developing greater leveraging opportunities for us. I mentioned a couple earlier. I did not mention PACE. That clearly, that is another leveraging opportunity here as well on the financing side. And we've been having regular discussions with the PACE team, but I wouldn't want to say that is an exhaustive list of opportunities that might be available for the sustainable energy utility as we would seek to leverage in more funds. Last 2, improving our customer experience. We've had some customers, particularly on the residential side, on our federal home loan bank program, who have experienced some bumps in the road, and we'd like to talk about smoothing that out. And on the commercial side, we've heard, I'm sorry Ms. Snarsky isn't here today, but some others maybe who have said that our commercial programs are not as transparent, as accessible, as easily understood as one might like. And so if there is some information that we can put together that would further help our commercial customers access our programs, if there's another way of us doing some marketing around these programs, I think that's a discussion that we would like to have. I think clearly we are hearing from, like I said, commercial and residential customers alike. There are different sorts of complaints, but we would want to improve our customer experience. And then finally, of course, as we start to plan for our FY14 activities, and programs. We would have to think about a discussion with the advisory board about, we will have an additional $2.5 million in programming for FY '14 over what we currently have in FY '13. You can simply expand upon what you have now. This was a year where we talked about possibly doing a cool roofs project. I don't think we will have the money to do it in FY '13. We might want to talk about that in '14 or what something else might look like, but we think that there will be opportunities for discussion around our FY '14 programs as well. And with that, I think that's the last slide I have. Thank you. Thank you.
Chairman Kane?
Yeah, Ted, you mentioned 2014 is your last thing. What is your timetable in preparing the 2014 budget? Will you be, we know for city agencies, the budget hearings have started.
Right.
And conclude pretty much the end of this month with, now I know your dollars are set by statute, what you have. What is your timing on preparing a 2014 budget, and how does that intersect with any advice timing from the board?
I think we have a good amount of time left before our 2014 budget in terms of programming, at the programmatic level, will be set. So I think we probably are dealing with at least 3 months or so before we'll be looking to establish the programmatic budget. As you said, the overall level of expenditures has already been set.
And your process on that is that you present that budget to DDOE.
Yes.
And they obviously approve it, pending the decision about using the option year, exercising the option year. Assuming an option year, that budget would be presented when to DDOE?
Probably at around the July.
July. And so for any advice from the advisory board
clearly
on the
prior to
budget,
that.
I guess I'd have to ask DDOE, would you want that advice from the advisory board prior to the SEU presenting a budget to you, or after?
I think after would be
you're
helpful.
asking
At least you need to see how they intend to spend the money, and then we can make comments on it.
You can make comments, but the advisory board make comments on it?
Yeah, certainly. If you guys take a look at it, it usually comes as part of the annual plan that they provide to us. So once we get to that stage, we can review the budget and the annual plan all at once, and then provide comments to the DCSU.
She's saying when
I'm
will
thinking
you
about timing, I'm thinking
advise?
about our next meetings and finance committee meetings and kind of structuring that over between now and October 1st.
And as I said, it would be after we receive it from the SEU, because right now you would essentially be commenting on FY '13,
Right.
with not knowing how they plan on doing it in '14.
So you're
So
suggesting...
let's wait until we receive it from them.
And that would be
then-
July, you would expect to get it from the SEU?
I would say early in August, more so than in July, early in August.
So would it be helpful for them to submit it to us as well as you at the same time, so that we can then not lose any time with your looking at it and sending it back? That's just technical, practical.
Yeah.
Ted, I have a question regarding your community outreach. One of the issues that I see in terms of the branding and customer awareness is the absence of what I would describe as sort of a grassroots effort. Is there, I know, for example, OPC, we go out all the time. Our energy efficiency manager has gone over 140, outreach events. Is it a problem in terms of resources that you're not able to actually get out on a grassroots level? Like to the ANC commissions, the civic, I know you're doing something, but the intensity doesn't seem...
I think, let me answer that in 2 different ways. Last summer, we had a sustained and a very accelerated effort to get out to every community event that we could find, particularly, those community events that were taking place on the weekends and stuff like that. We thought we could intersect with a lot of members in the community. We also had one of the people who were selling the CFLs out there with us, helping to promote the CFLs, and we sold a tremendous amount of CFLs. This year, we're approaching it similarly and adding to that. And I, admire Herb Jones, who's sitting right behind you, who has been just, excellent. I mean, one of the best in the city at this for a number of years in terms of getting out to the advisory neighborhood commissioners, the civic and citizens associations. And so we're adding that layer this year. We're building in a component that will not only allow us to go out in the spring and summer and fall and hit all of these community events, but will allow us as well to do some of the things like Herb does, where we're actually going
I
into.
have to also Pam Nelson, she is here.
I'm sorry, Pam, yeah, actually,
I don't know where she is.
pardon me for that omission, Pam, absolutely. So we will be actually doing those things as well, and there's some opportunities that you guys
Is that
see.
a job opportunity, a green job opportunity, and would that be an issue? That,
No, we would do that with current staff. I mean, there's no challenge
asking
in
for
terms of
resource,
staff.
there is no challenge in terms of staff, that's my question.
No, we're fine.
Thank you. Joe, we're going to be very...
Real quick, the issues chart that you showed at the end, where you want feedback from the advisory board, I think we're out of time here for that advice, but perhaps there's a formal way we can do it where,
Are we supposed to meet with the SEU?
yeah, I mean, we still have, I don't know where that's at, to be honest. I think we do have meetings. I recall at one point someone...
Statute says something about
Yes,
meeting.
meetings in between, that in between the board meetings, there
Right.
can be a meeting directly with the board and the SEU. And if people want to set a time for that as well as the next SEU meeting, this is a good forum.
Yeah, I think so, because that would allow us to provide meaningful advice.
On whatever,
Yeah, on those issues or any other issues. I think that's worthwhile. I mean, we need to help with whatever we know.
But as you know, those meetings remain public as well.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
The same way that they did when we did a few last summer and last fall.
Yeah.
But if that's useful to the SEU, that's something that we can push.
Joe, anything else?
No, that was it, thank you.
Very anything, what do you...
Just a very quick comment on something that you did not mention, but I want to say the SEU has been very helpful. But the SEU has worked hand in hand with DDOE on the benchmarking effort. And, this continues, because even if the deadline was April 1st, there are still people out there looking for help. The initial results are relatively high. But what I want to say is that's also a source of leads for them to continue on the CNI sector. So, that's something that we have going on for us on the commercial side this year.
When you say the leads are high, or results are high, is it the percentage
Yeah,
of buildings or the rating of
It
Energy
is,
Star?
it's preliminary, the results of number of buildings.
Okay.
But it's above 60%, and if you look at the first round from any city, that's high.
Okay.
In terms of Energy Star, it's in the ratings, it's in the 70s.
Okay.
And those are not verified results at this point, but, results that we've made public to that level.
That's good to know, thank you.
Jermaine, then Dan.
Yeah, I was just really wanted to talk to you all about discussing some of the problems you exist in the natural gas programs. And I'm working with the schools right now on implementing a wood energy program. Wood pellet boilers at the school that actually create heat, hot water, thaw out your driveways. But then it also creates 50 kilowatts of power, 10 hours a day. So if you all really are serious, just like I'm working with the Department of Housing and Community Development, they identified 200 homes they're going to put new roofs on. And I was discussing with them, if they're going to provide the cost of their programs of putting the new roofs on, how much of incentive could the SEU give in providing the solar that's going to go on new roofs? Because they spend up to $15,000 in their grant program.
You're absolutely right. We partnered with them last year. That's how we found some of the roofs where we did
Right,
some of
but
our
we
solar
were getting ready
projects.
to do like 150 to 200 new roofs. Last year, I didn't do too many with Department of Housing and Community Development. I work with them every day. So I just want to make sure that on the natural gas side that you all are really willing to implement some new programs and look a different way, because Vermont Investment Group, they from Vermont, they have a lot of wood energy programs up in their school up in Vermont. And it's just funny to me how they just haven't even implemented any of that down here with our schools. We're near like every federal park is a federal park, there's wood there. Wood waste just laying there. We're not no more than 50 miles from any federal park or in the city. And we're not taking advantage of all that fuel that's sitting right there. So I don't know who over at the SEU is in charge of the natural gas or the renewable energy programs, but I would like to speak to that person. Who's in charge of natural gas programs? Who's in charge of renewable energy? Because to me, if 1.9 million is sitting there, we could easily put boilers around the school and you'll achieve your requirements or your goals that you need to meet for natural gas. So would you know that person name? Who's in charge of the renewable energy?
Oh, sure. Well, on the renewable side, we don't really have on the renewable side. George Nichols has been working with us, but we don't have any programs Chris Van Arsdale has been working, Chris is oh, he was here a second ago. Either one of those two. On the gas side, I want to connect you with the new manager I was talking about. We had hired a lady named Patty Boyd. Okay?
All right. Ted, would you say a little bit more about, near the end, you had some line items. One had to do with jobs, and I think you were talking about jobs beyond, maybe including contractors and so forth. Would you go into that a bit more?
Sure. The way we currently count green jobs is we're looking at green jobs where we can directly show a spend. That would be staff within the DCSEU. If we hire a contractor to go out and do some installations, we would get certified payroll from that contractor in order to show that that contractor hired DC residents and how many hours the DC residents worked. We would account for all of that. The way some others suggest that you might account for green jobs in addition to what we're already doing is looking at what are called what I call secondary. There's induced jobs and then indirect jobs. Let's talk about indirect jobs first. Let's say we know that we have 12 different contractors working in our T12 program, where we're going out and taking out the old fluorescent bulbs and they're replacing them with the high efficient T8s, and then they're going in and taking out the ballast and replacing them as well. We know that there are supply houses here in the District of Columbia where they're actually going to buy the supplies. Somebody's got to order supplies, somebody's got to do accounting for the supplies, somebody might help contractors load them onto the trucks. We can't count hours worth of any of that work. Those are not people with whom we have a direct contractual relationship. In addition to that, if we are spending roughly $16 or so million in the economy here in the District of Columbia, we know that that is probably inducing some other work as well. We are not accounting for any of that work either. We're counting only for what we would call the direct side of the house, where we can say we've got a direct relationship, contractual relationship. We can count these hours. We have certified payroll to verify every hour that somebody worked. But we think that there are more hours out there clearly between our suppliers, some people working on a secondary level, and just as people are earning more money as workers, they're spending money here in the District of Columbia. Again, that hopefully is creating some job opportunities here, but again, we're not accounting for that. Under our current methodology of counting green jobs.
Good, thanks, that's good.
Follow up on that, because so the 70-30, let's say the 70-30 program that you have, let's say that generates $3.5 million worth of work, the $2.5 million that you have. Do you get credit for all the jobs created to that $3.5 million, or only 70%? I can't recall.
All of them, as long as we can verify the hours worked by the residents.
So the greater the leverage or copay by the customer, the more jobs you can create in those programs. Okay, absolutely.
Well, that's what I want to speak to, because I have several contractors that I work with submitted, custom programs with the SEU, $150,000, $200,000, and all the SEU gave us incentives, $15,000 or $20,000 here. There. That's not going to get some of the big energy users to move at all. I mean, you can say you're going to give up 30. And far as I've been seeing coming back with the contractors I'm working with, it's 10, 5%. It's nowhere near the 30% share. I even suggested, because I've just bought 5 acres in DC and I want to build a solar farm. I'm going to come to you as a resident business owner to see what you all going to give as an incentive to build it. Truthfully, so around town, you're not giving up that much money. And maybe it's because it's a reimbursed type contract. You got to have some money to spend some money. And it seems like the SU is spending what they want to spend on, so they make sure they can build DDOE and get their money back. That's a lot of administrative costs. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the money is spent. So how much money is really going to go to create some more green jobs and really get some work done when most of the money has just been spent in-house?
Time for maybe 2 more comments.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, at this time, in the interest of time, so if you don't mind, we'll move your item to the next meeting.
Yeah, there was something sent out before.
Okay. Are there any new matters?
Yep.
Larry?
We need to figure out how we're going to write the report this year, so we don't talk about it at our August meeting and decide that we're going to get started in September.
Absolutely.
So is that a new item for the next meeting, or in between the meetings?
I think that should be between.
It looks like our next meeting would be in July, probably.
Probably, even before we had a date that we're looking, maybe in June.
June?
And then it's easier, at least for some of us, early June, to go around the table and see. We have June 3rd. Exactly. Does that work with people?
This is for the next board meeting?
Yeah.
And do we have a date for the, for meeting with the SEU?
No, that's what you guys can come up with, a date.
I think we should meet with them before the board.
Yeah, I think so.
Do we have too much on the Structural Finance Committee to deal with that report issue in between? Can we add that to that, or is it too much? Is that
The
too much?
report, or you mean the
That issue
annual
that's right.
annual report?
Yeah, we just read it.
No.
Maybe we add it to that and you can send around an email to set something up for that, for the SFC.
All right.
Maybe, just a suggestion.
All right, I'll do that. We did want to have a small committee meeting and a
lead
bylaws
that?
committee.
Will you lead that new
Small
small
committee
group
meeting?
meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to ask people to send you who they think, who wants to be on, and how do you want to handle that? Small meeting, which I think would be useful.
I'll collect volunteers and I'll
Okay.
send them on to Keith, and Keith can select people to participate.
Certainly.
Does that seem like a good approach?
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to nail down our next advisory board meeting. June 3rd, there's a conflict with that.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, but Tuesday,
Yeah,
June
we're
4th.
hosting a
Okay.
Mid-Atlantic Commissioners meeting on cybersecurity, which I want DDOE and People's Council.
And I wanted to avoid those at the end of June, so that was one of the days. And I know
Does Tuesday, June 4th work?
that would be the next weekend.
Wednesday would be better, but for me.
Yeah, the
Wednesday would be better,
Tuesday
but.
That's the 5th?
Either for me. What about you, Chairman King? Is there one that's better?
Wednesday,
Make it on my birthday again. 3 years in a
Tuesday's
row.
better?
When's your birthday?
June 6th. Make it 3 years in a row.
Okay.
Every
We'll bring
every one.
We'll
Every
bring cake this
3
time.
years in a row.
This time we'll have cake.
We're gonna bring you some wood for your wood fire.
No, bring me all wood. That's
Okay.
it. Yeah, all wood.
We're going to visit that
5-acre,
Yeah,
The
Dean
fourth?
Wood, Kenneth Word. It look like a
Tuesday.
purple
How many
park.
people, the 4th? How many people could accommodate the 4th?
I'm convinced.
Good.
Okay, so let's do that for June 4th,
10 a.m.
10 a.m.
June 4.
We'll still bring a cake, John.
And
That's cool.
Yeah,
Close enough.
I had to
John,
make
do you
that
want to
on my
set your
site.
other meetings, that's the in-between meetings that we're not involved?
Push the SEU on the
I certainly want to set it, but I
You
think,
don't now,
that'll get
we
wet.
can more.
Larry, did we square away your?
June 4th, 10 o'clock.
Close enough.
how do we want to set this meeting with the SEU? Because I think we need to get together with Ted.
Yes, we need some RSVP.
Yeah, we were-
We're bringing you back.
We were saying that we're supposed to have these periodic meetings with SEU,
That's going to be between now and June 3rd.
and we want to try to do it between now
So,
and June.
Can we ask
4th.
Lenore to send out maybe 3 or 4 dates for everyone? Can we settle on?
Unless people have one.
Where the board, advisory board meets with you.
Again,
So-
We'll share a couple of dates.
I'll ask Lenore to send out 3 or 4 dates.
Okay.
And settle on one.
Yeah,
Between now and June 4th.
Yep.
Any other new matters?
And Larry, you're going to send something out regarding the Finance Committee meetings?
And bylaw, we should do a joint bylaw, special finance.
And that smaller group, you're gonna call it something? We should
Small
find a name.
committee.
Small committee. No, that's fine, as long as we know that's the one.
Any other new matters? Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you, folks.